Tonight, however, I am pleased to welcome Emily Rapp to our stage. Let me dispense with the stuff I normally say at this point, which is this. Emily Rapp is a former Fulbright scholar and graduate of Harvard University, the author of 2 memoirs, Poster Child, and most recently, The Still Point of the Turning World. Her essays have appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Slate, and Salon, among many others. And she has received the Ronan Jaffe Writers Award, a James Michener Fellowship at the University of Texas, and was the Philip Roth Writer-in-Residence at Bucknell University. She lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she is a professor of writing and literature at the Santa Fe University of Art and Design, and she is also on the faculty of the low residency MFA program in creative writing and writing for the performing arts at the University of California, Riverside, Palm Desert. Now here's what I want you to know. I first learned of Emily Rapp on the freeway. I was driving between Los Angeles and Palm Springs, listening to NPR, and I heard Emily being interviewed by Terry Gross on Fresh Air. This was about 6 or 7 years ago. She was there to promote her first book, the memoir Poster Child, about growing up with a congenital defect that resulted in the amputation of most of her left leg, as well as her subsequent time as the March of Dimes poster child, and on into a rather somewhat fraught adulthood. It was an excellent interview, which highlighted both Emily's rare humor and keen insight. And so the next day I ran out and I bought the book and I read it in one sitting, and I determined that I had to meet this person. And then I met her, oddly enough, at a bar where I was doing a reading. She was nice enough to stay through it. She was the only person there, which made it easier. And then after meeting her, I determined I also had to hire her, which I was finally able to do last year. Tonight, Emily is here to talk about her best-selling new book, The Still Point of the Turning World, which details her experience after her son Ronan was diagnosed with Tay-Sachs disease, which sadly took his life 1 month ago. I usually like to say something here about the rave reviews the book has received, which it has. I like to say how much I admire the writer, which I do. But what I like to say tonight is I'm just happy to see my friend Emily Rapp.
So I'm going to read briefly, probably about 15 minutes, from chapter 11 of my book, which is about how my experience parenting Ronan changed the way I write and the way I understand myself as an artist, which was one of the many gifts he gave me and continues to give me, I think other people also. So it begins with a poem by Philip Pardee called Sonata, or an excerpt from a poem. The moment before joy is horizonless. What falls, falls, surrounded by what's falling. In those winter and early spring months of 2011, I was writing about Ronan and he was still alive. As a teacher of writing, I had in the past yammered on at length about the importance of gaining objectivity about a situation drawn from real life, especially a deeply personal or emotionally difficult one, in order to render it effectively without sentimentality or nostalgia. I chucked that piece of advice because after Ronan's diagnosis, I found the opposite to be true. I wrote with my son in my lap or within arm's reach. I wrote while looking right at him, in the middle of feeding him, talking to him, wiping his mouth, ruffling the fuzzy hair on the back of his head. I wrote in a rage, in tears, through laughter, exhaustion, and bizarre moments of euphoria. For many years, I had a quote given to me by a writing professor, Dennis Johnson, in graduate school, pinned above my desk. Write with blood. I thought it sounded very serious and writerly. After I started writing Ronan's story, I finally understood what it meant and took it down. The advice was too resonant, too true, and I didn't need it anymore. Many writers have written beautifully about grief while in the raw early stages of it. Grief, this extreme experience, forces a writer to draw on her deepest resources, and such a dive demands so much work that what comes up must be heaped onto the page almost immediately. Otherwise, it might eat the thinker alive, drown her. Or at least that's how I felt. You can eat fire for only so long, and then you've got to spit it out in another form, or risk the burn. But as I pulled book after book from my bookshelves, looking for how various writers told their stories, I'd read a few pages and throw them on the floor. My skin prickled with mean-spirited annoyance, and then I felt myself getting angry. I was vibrating with rage. Many of the books were about dead spouses, dying parents, dying dogs. My loss is different, I thought. It's worse, I thought. I felt sick to my stomach, sat down on the floor, put my head in my hands, and thought, wait. My initial reaction to these books, knee-jerk and overly emotional, automatically assumed the existence of a ladder of loss and a method for placing a person's sadness on a particular rung. So on the lower rung, the loss of a pet fish. On the upper rung, the loss of a parent. Yes, you might say, just like that. But what if the fish belonged to a 5-year-old and it was his first experience with death, and you were charged with explaining what had happened and what it meant? What if the parent or spouse or baby was suffering for years or months or even for just 1 minute? Then what? Bump down a few rungs on the ladder? This idea that there existed a hierarchy and my grief is more grievous than yours method of ranking, with those at the top having a more gut-wrenching, authentically earth-shaking experience, while those on the lower rungs were just super sad, was obviously ludicrous, and I was reluctantly forced to admit my short-sighted and simplistic response. Loss, like any profound human experience, is not quantifiable. If there did exist a competition for grief, who would want to win it? This is precisely why grief, like love and any other foundational, deceptively simple human emotion or state of being, is the terrain of artists. And it is a writer's even more specific job to give voice to loss in whatever way she can, to give shape to this unspeakable, impermeable reality beneath all others. Elizabeth Bishop's famous poem, One Loss, speaks precisely to this fact. There are not a handful of losses to master, but one, not a tangled batch of emotions to understand, just the one, grief. When I emerged from those first thunderous days after Ronan's diagnosis, I began to write because it felt like the only thing I was able to do. I could not have been more surprised, and I was actually embarrassed. I wanted to write? Really? Losing my child, an experience already against the expected natural order of things, would be my first experience of a loss of this magnitude. But there I went again. What did I mean? The pesky ranking system of grief. And I had expectations about what a grieving person does, says, feels, how they act, what they do. Wasn't I supposed to run barefoot through the streets in my nightdress and shriek and howl and pull my hair out? I did a version of this, only indoors. But one can maintain that for only so long. Eventually I sat up and thought, yes, this is apocalyptic and world-ending, but also, leave me alone, get out of my way, I've got work to do, please let me write. Why? I'd been disconnected from my writing life for years, and during the time that I'd been preaching in writing classes about the importance of establishing objective distance from difficult life stories before trying to render them on the page. Or, and I quote myself, otherwise those stories can be heavy loads for the reader to lift. Writing, I went on, should not be therapeutic, it's not therapy, it's art. Now I had my own monstrous load to haul around, and although I still believed that it couldn't be all doomsday and sadness in the writing, even if that was how the heart felt, I found my advice very simplistic, borderline self-righteous, and wholly uneducated in the vicissitudes of grief. In those first hellish weeks, I had to write. That was all there was. That was living. My friend Lisa, also a writer and one schooled in the ways of grief, called me every day. Write, she urged, do it right now. Well, that's all very dramatic, I thought, writing with Ronan snuggled into my armpit, but what does writing do? It was not saving Ronan in the literal sense, if only, because nothing could, and it wouldn't save anyone else, and it certainly wasn't going to save the world. What about my intentions? Was I trying to save Ronan as a turning his story into a project would make the situation less true and therefore easier to bear? Yes and no. Writers scribbling in the midst of grief have noted the ways in which writing about the experience from the inside creates something new, a safe or safe-ish place to land, a net, a landing point, a dock from which to view the turbulent and troubled water without having to wade in it every moment of every day. In a word, relief. The act of creation forces the creator to establish a new world with new rules and structure and form, an act that's sustaining not only in an emotional and a human way, but also in an artistic way. This last point is key. Yes, these grieving writers journaled and documented their day-to-day lives, all those singular moments, but they also went back and shaped their words. They did the work of revision, they wrestled with language and form. Plunked down into a situation in which they were entirely helpless, they found something to do, not to distract themselves from the situation, but to look it straight in the face as artists, like it or not, are required to do. Otherwise, what are we doing? After those first few weeks of blackness and bouncing back and forth in the void, I realized I didn't want to be coddled or protected from the wild unpredictability of my feelings. I wanted to work, laugh, write, be, and live. People fully expected the weeping and gnashing of teeth, but they also expected the griever to get over it already. Grief makes people feel awkward, in part because we've been trained to say things like, I can't imagine, and somehow you'll get past it, and keep yourself busy, and when God closes a door, he opens a window. All these useless sayings that stem from the death phobia that permeates our culture. Also, why is God in the house? And I would argue, because grief is so intimate and unwieldy, and like individual experiences of pain, truly unknowable, even to the person walking or stumbling through it, it can be difficult to make a connection with someone in the midst of it, even if that person is your spouse, your mother, or your best friend, even yourself. We all avoid death. We don't want to see it, talk about it, or think about it. But digging into the experience of loss is not only deeply profound, artistically at some point, absolutely electric. People want and sometimes encourage the griever to numb it or erase it, or at the very least ignore it, and all a writer can think to do is to pull it closer and wrap her arms around it and dig in her fingernails and hang on. Don't write if you don't feel up to it, people cautioned me when I told them I had started to write about Ronan. But it didn't matter if I felt up to it. It was my responsibility, it was my job. It ordered chaos, focused energy, provided a way of bearing up that no period of restfulness could possibly accomplish. In other words, rendering loss was a way of honoring my son's life. I brought my whole self to the page and used my whole heart to consider what I was writing. I let go of my old fears about how my work would be received, how I was or would be received, and just created. There was nowhere to go inside Ronan's terminal diagnosis, but on the page my mind could move, and I was, for that brief period of time, an hour, 4 hours, 3 minutes, 5 seconds, free. So you might say that I was and still am compelled to write, called to write, forced to write. Who is doing the calling? Is it God? Pastors and priests and other holy folks and men and women of the cloth. I love this expression because it brings to mind loincloths, as if pastors were early hunter-gatherers, but of souls instead of big game, are called to their vocations. It sounds nice, but when your pastor dad, like mine, is called to middle of nowhere Nebraska when you're a bratty 14-year-old, the romance of the idea fizzles quickly, as does the playfulness of the loincloth imagery. St. Paul Nassau had a conversion experience akin to a seizure of the soul and spirit that prompted him to change his entire life and write a lot of letters. Martin Luther was struck by a violent lightning force of a calling that had him trembling on his fat knees on a dirt road somewhere in rural Germany, questioning all that he had previously and so ardently believed in. Out of this experience, he crafted Lutheranism. John Calvin believed that our vocations were preordained by God. Do lawyers have such melodramatic vocational callings? Plumbers, maids, editors, CEOs? In Frances Sherwood's novel Vindication, about the life of pioneering feminist Mary Wollstonecraft, there's a scene in which Mary is trying to puzzle out the age-old why bad things happen to good people conundrum. Why do some people receive soft down pillows and chocolates and other people are left to battle a constant shitstorm? For answers, she turns to Mr. Price, her pastor, her mentor, and most importantly, the first and only gentle man she's ever known, a man who believes that women, and especially Mary, can have a life of the mind and that her wholly original ideas will teach and inspire and change people. Let God be the judge, Mr. Price cautioned. Things happen for a reason. Bad things? She asked. Sometimes. We learn from them. Tell me, Mary insisted, is there a reason for a child's death? What does a dead child learn? Mr. Price has no pithy answer for this in the novel, and I doubt Calvin would either. His children all died in infancy. But later in Sherwood's novel, which pulls no punches and can be rough going, this portrait of the artist as a young woman makes clear that being a brilliant thinker cost the tormented, mercurial, and impulsive Wollstonecraft. Her inner and outer lives were constantly at odds. After a second suicide attempt, Mary awakens on the bank of the Thames, having just been rescued from the water. This event marks a kind of rebirth for her, an awakening. We must go on living, Mary concluded. It is our duty. But is it enough? What did you do to get through? I've asked other moms with kids at Tay-Sachs, thinking about how the next few years of my life would roll out. Make memories, they advised. For some, that meant going to Disneyland or the Bahamas with their families. I understood both approaches, but they didn't resonate with me. We sat on the couch a lot. One mom, Sharon, told me about her time with her son Harry, who died at Tay-Sachs when he was 2.5. That's what I remember most. That spoke to me. I spend and have spent a great deal of my life sitting on couches, reading, writing, and talking on the phone. During my college summer vacations when I wasn't peddling overpriced bras and matching underwear at the lingerie store in the mall, or selling hiking boots and waterproof watches at the sporting goods store on the other floor of the mall, I parked my book-hungry self on the blue-flowered couch in my parents' living room and got up only for meals the mail, the share exercise video that I did once a day, and the nightly jabberfest with my closest friends on the phone in my dad's basement office, where I installed myself on an equally comfortable yet rattier couch. When I sat writing with Ronan on the couch, there existed inside this helpless, frantic sadness, exquisite moments of pristine happiness, and an almost perfect peace. I propped him against my chest and circled my arms around him to get to the keyboard on my laptop. I stared at him and tickled him and kissed him and wished that my words, anything, could save him. But no, writing would not save Ronan. But, I thought, it might save me. Thanks.
Let's talk, before we talk about your book, let's talk about other books. No. let's talk about, so what is your favorite book of mine?
What's hot? Living Dead over there. Those Bird Nose books.
Those Bird Nose books are quite moving. Let's talk a little bit about your path to this point. So your first book, Poster Child, details first what you were born with. What's the factual name of the defect that took part of your life?
Proximal focal femoral deficiency.
That's a good one.
That's a good one, right?
Yeah.
Nice, like Rapp tone too.
It's going to be on the test, so take that note down.
Yeah.
So you were born with that, and you became a poster child at 4, was it?
6.
6 years old. So you have spent a good portion of your life sort of in front of people, talking about things that are difficult.
Pretty much. Yay!
How have you, well, number one, why do you make that choice? And number two, how do you deal with it on a day-to-day basis?
I don't know why I made that choice. And actually, now that you ask me, I'm not sure why. Why did I become an accountant? I think...
But it pays better.
Yeah, right.
Accountant.
I think it was just kind of, I think as a writer it was actually really good training because writers have a public persona and then they have a private life. Like, we're kind of polarized, I think, in that sense. So I think it was just those are the issues that interested me. Like, I just wasn't interested in, like, kittens and puppies, and I was just like, what's God? You know, I mean, I've always been like that. And my dad was a pastor. I grew up in a religious household, so those issues were topics of conversation. And I don't know how I manage on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I think it's so, like, people are always shocked that I can talk about Ronan without, like, freaking out, but he was sick for 2 years.
Right.
So by the time he died, he was ready to go. And so I think anyone who's ever lost someone knows that you would rather have them not suffer than to live on in a body that had nothing for them in this world. So I think one of the things that I've never had much of is the magical thinking gene. I didn't get that one.
Well, and that's sort of an interesting thing, because I think of this book in sort of the same way that I think of The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion, where you're dealing with trauma, and you're also trying to push through to the next thing.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about that in this. You talk a lot about in Poster Child the sort of realization also of what it means to be or not to be special, also, and that, and about what that life is like. So when you are going in and choosing to write about your life, you're examining the tough parts as a memoirist. What makes it easy for you to, well, I don't know if easy is the right word, but what makes you capable of parsing the difficult things for the rest of the world? I mean, how do you channel those things?
Make them readable without them being left out. I think...
Without also losing a bit of yourself.
Say again?
Without losing a bit of yourself, too.
I think you do lose a bit of yourself. I think part of my tactic, at least with this book, was, first of all, I wrote it in sort of a manic writing fit. So I don't remember writing some of it, so I can't really speak to how that happened.
Could I claim that I was one of the co-writers?
You can just put your name right on the book. And I also think what I fall back on is I've always loved language. I'm sort of a failed poet of a kind, and I've always wanted to be a poet.
Oh God. Well, good night, everybody.
Anyway, and I'm not a poet. I write one poem a year, in some kind of class that I take in order to write the poem. So I think language. I think when they get into the language part of a book, the content becomes less of a sort of stone. And I guess humor, and also just especially for this book in particular, it's like everyone understands loss. Like, not everyone understands what it means to have an artificial leg, and creepy people who make the legs, and get lipstick on your hips when they're. I mean, that's gross. It's like weird and kind of grotesque and strange, and also funny and bizarre. And I have a funny story about that I want to tell you.
I like that. The creepy people who make your leg would be a good title for your third book.
Wouldn't it?
Yes.
Wait, so then I was, in this book, I was just thinking, everyone's had some kind of loss, and it doesn't matter what. Like your dog, your spouse, your mother, someone, it is you, and you all, everyone is also going to die. Not everyone is going to lose their leg. So I actually feel like this book is sort of looking that reality right in the face. The story I wanted to tell, though, can I tell it?
You may.
So when I got on the plane, I do the pre-board now because I just, it's got to be a perk.
Right,
you know?
might as well.
So I never used to, and then my friend was like, why don't you have the placard, why are you not getting on the plane early? Like, please do that. So I did, and so I love it, because I get there and I get all settled. And so I got on the plane, and the man said to me, he's like, thank you for your service. And I realized he thought I was a vet. And I was like, oh my God. And then when the plane landed, everyone clapped. I was mortified. And it's interesting to me, though, because of course it shows people, it reminded me of poster child, because the only context people have now for disability is war. And I was just like, do I look like I could be in the army? No!
You do look like Jessica Chastain in Zero Dark 30, as we were discussing earlier.
My agent. And I was just like, really? I just want to, oh my God.
Well, that was a big part about poster child, is that you didn't have anyone to identify with aside from that.
I love Vietnam vets, which is a whole different breed.
Right.
Those guys are grumpy and, you know, they are not the sort of bubbly 21-year-olds I'm meeting now. They are grumpy and they still want to chain smoke in the office, and no. So I was just kind of, it was just a strange experience where I A, felt old, and B, just felt like, really? You can't imagine anyone having any difference in the door?
You were on the Today Show on Friday. You don't think they all recognized you from that?
What, the vets?
Yeah, no, the people on the plane.
Oh. No, I don't, actually. No. I don't.
Were you wearing an EmilyRapp.com t-shirt?
No. No.
Can I get you one?
No. UC Riverside?
Yes, UC Riverside.
No, I was not wearing a
self-promotional
t-shirt, sadly.
We'll get you those. So,
Burn notice t-shirt, so I should have worn.
You talk about coming from a religious background. You have a degree in divinity. Your father is a pastor, is that the right word?
Yeah,
as a Jew, I never know the right words for these things. Apparently some leader was
rabbi.
was
like
elected
that same thing. They can get married, they can have kids.
Oh, they can have sex?
Yeah.
Oh.
The Pope, not so much, no.
The Pope can't have sex?
He cannot.
Well, that was not him in the video I saw. As we lose the Catholic audience, quietly. Well, you talk in both your books a lot about faith, and a lot about religion, and how you have both had and lost it. Can you talk a little bit about that in the scope of dealing with something like Tay-Sachs disease? And we should probably see, does everyone know what Tay-Sachs disease is? If you don't know, maybe we could briefly say what Tay-Sachs disease is.
I probably just said that. Tay-Sachs is a genetic neurological disorder. It's the easiest way to understand it is like Alzheimer's for babies. Everything get robbed of all of their faculties. So that's what it is. The brain is basically doesn't work. And that's a really scientific explanation, right. But you know.
And the thought process most of us are aware of, in which Emily talks a lot about in the book about it not being entirely accurate, is that it is primarily an Ashkenazi Jews, but it actually falls all over the place. Emily, not a Jew. You can tell from the hair.
Well, I tried to be, but that didn't work.
So how do you reconcile this upbringing, this search for divinity that you had, and then this as you described in the book, this ancient disease? Well,
you know, at first, it just to me, it felt like some kind of like biblical Job moment. Like I really felt like Job. I felt like I had been cursed, and it was really helpful that people also said you must feel cursed. That was super.
Oh,
helpful.
That must have been nice.
I love that, man. I'd be like at Trader Joe's, and I'd be like, really, you know. Like, you think you're gonna die? Like, I can't go back to like the wine section of Trader Joe's. Scary old witch. It's just made me so mad. So yeah, I did feel like, how am I gonna grapple? And then I was like, thank God for weirdos like Calvin and Luther and Hegel and all these like dead white theologian-ish people, because they actually try to grapple with the meaning. And so for me, it was just like, okay, other people have gone through this. Other people have suffered. Everyone's. So how am I going to like marshal the resources, and how am I going to make sense of it? So that was kind of, I think, wasn't what I was intending to do in the book, but that ends up happening that way. And I have, of course, because I have a degree in God, I have a lot. I have a lot of resources at my disposal.
When you get a diploma with the degree in God, just a giant light comes down.
Pretty much. I almost got a dirty trick there, but I resisted. So yeah, I mean, I had a lot of experience reading sort of the Bible in various sort of permutations in different languages, and so I knew these stories, and it's a very archetypal story, right? The doomed child, the magical child, the sort of Messiah child. I mean, and people would say to me, like, Ronan is just like Jesus, and I'd be like, whoa, dude, like, what? So I mean, there's a lot of like, sort of mythology around kids who are born with illnesses, born for a short life. And I also went to like 6 shamans, because there are a lot of them in Santa Fe, who like journeyed for me into mountains and played flutes and told me that he was like a divine boy, and they all said that. So then I was like, but he must be. I mean, it was just like such a. I mean,
but you have to be searching for meaning.
Something, yeah. It's just like, yeah.
Some sense of order in your life.
Yeah.
And also because, and I know I keep talking about her first book a lot, but I think her first book is important to understand her second book. But a lot of what you talk about in that first book are the things that you end up dealing with again with your son.
No, it's like Groundhog Day from hell. I know. That's someone said, one of my friends from divinity school was like, oh my God, this is just like your first book, only worse. I'm like, I don't know how to take that, but thanks. I think in some ways I was the best mother for Ronan because I was equipped with a kind of belief that shit happens. Mm-hmm. And so I was actually talking to a writer friend of mine tonight, and he was like, what I really like about your work is that you just don't have that kind of, it'll all be fine. You don't sweep it under the rug. And I'm a Protestant. I mean, what happened? My parents were mortified. Like, don't talk about this problem. So I think I sort of, because I was raised to not talk about it, I of course went the other direction and talk about it not ad nauseum,
Well, and you wrote a piece in the New York Times, and you talk about a lot in the book as well, about the different kind of parenting you have to have and have the ability to do with a child who's going to die. Can you talk a little bit about that realization and how you're able to cope with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at first it obviously was like the worst day of my life, but then what ended up happening was that it opened up my world to all different kinds of people who had lost their children, not as babies or toddlers, but as adults. So I get these emails from women who are like, my only daughter was just killed in a car wreck yesterday, and then she wanted to have a conversation in email. Or a woman whose son died suddenly in the middle of the night of a heart attack next to his wife who was dying of cancer. I mean, this is the thing, is that chaos is like, what it made me just realize was that chaos is just the reality in life. And if we would just honor that and understand that like any of us could drop dead at any moment, which we know but don't want to know, then we would live life differently. We wouldn't get annoyed that our kids didn't get into like a fancy preschool or weren't lawyers or doctors, like kids, or whatever it is we want them to do. Like, they're not projects or chia pets. Like, you don't grow them to like look cute on the shelf. Like, they're people. So for Ronan, I was just like, and my parents parented me that way. Like, they were like, oh, here's this girl with like a wooden leg and she's totally insane and like won't be quiet and like writes all the time and won't sleep and but they love me. And Ronan was that way too. Like, Ronan never talked, he never walked, but he was so beautiful and sweet and had the best energy and presence. So he was my kid, that was what he did, that was the span of his life. Does it suck? Sure. But it wouldn't have sucked any less if he'd killed himself at 35 because he was depressed. I mean, no one knows what's going to happen. And I find that really comforting.
Well,
why, but
the idea of not making your children a project, and I don't have children, I have Cocker Spaniels. So that keep that set home.
They poop wherever they want.
Yeah, and then they eat it. The truth, I'm going to write a memoir about my time with my dog Scout. It's not going to be as good as Emily's
Scout.
book. Your name is she's heroic, that dog. This idea that they're not projects, I think that has really been the sort of thing that has swept across the country about your book. And it makes me wonder also about, this idea of what it means also to grieve in process. That you realize my son is not a project, I'm going to love him at this moment, but you're also experiencing loss as it happens. I don't want to ask you what that's like because it's in the book and it's horrible and it's awful, obviously. But to then try and share that with other people and to empathize with that, is that part of why you wrote this?
I did. I wrote it because, first of all, I don't think I had a choice whether or not to write it. It just sort of, when it started coming out, it just like, out it came. And I didn't, it was like there was no stopping it. And I do think for me, because I think this has to do with the first book too, is because people have been asking me questions, like really deeply personal questions to me, at me, my whole life. It made sense for me to go public, because I know how to do that. I don't know how to hold it in, because I've never had the opportunity. I've been rattling off my story in elevators since I was 6 years old, so I've never had the expectation of privacy. So for me, it was a natural thing to go out in the world, and also because I had just moved to Santa Fe, I had like 0 friends in town. And the blog started as a way of, you know, for writers like Lisa Glatt not like getting on a plane and wondering if I was still alive. And you know, people would be like, "Are you out there?" Right. And I didn't want to respond because I just couldn't. I would start talking about it, I would just lose my mind. So I started writing as a way of being like, here I am, you know, still. So I think it was sort of an act of faith that life goes on, and also a way of making Ronan, I think a way of making him less tragic, because certainly biologically he was completely tragic, but if you look at tragedy as a biological state or a moral state, he wasn't morally tragic. Like, his life had beauty and peace and love in it, and so, I don't know, like, I was really desperate to get that message out, and I don't know where that comes from. Maybe it's a maternal instinct, maybe it's that I didn't want him to repeat my story. But, you know, this is a baby without any ego or cognitive function. Like, he didn't care what I was doing. He just wanted to eat and, like, snuggle. So it's interesting to me that an egoless being would have such an impact on people. But it also makes sense.
Well, you spend a lot of time in the book talking about literature itself and trying to understand everything that you're going through the rubric of the things that you've read. You're constantly, in the book, searching for other books. And I wonder if you found more comfort in literature than you did from the other women and men you met that were part of the Tay-Sachs organization, or was it an equal thing, or was it also just something to fill you so that you didn't have to think about where you were?
I think it was all of those things. I mean, I think the literature component was useful because it's a brain distraction, and it's also interesting. You sort of get lost in the story, and you see how other people are doing it, and you feel accompanied in sort of an intellectual way. And the group of Tay-Sachs parents, I think, were just like an emotional support and a logistical, technical, practical support system. They're amazing. They wouldn't necessarily like want to read Hegel, right, for example, or talk to me about him at all, because really no one wants to talk about Hegel.
No one does.
Nobody does.
Most of this room doesn't know who the fuck you're talking about.
Okay. Okay.
Most people don't know who you're talking about.
Yeah, no one should.
No one should.
So I think for me it was an interesting lesson in how having spent a lot of money on my brain and having a really active life of the mind, what a refuge that was. And I was so glad that I haven't been reading vampire porn for like my whole life, or whatever students are doing now, because I was like, what would that get me? You know, like, I've been reading the classics since I was like 9. Like, I was a classics major, so no, right? It's a category.
Vampire
you should write it.
Oh, I've read some. I'm writing it.
It's a collaborative novel.
I might write some vampire porn later.
Yeah, good times.
Well,
so yeah.
Let's for a moment let's step back and actually talk about the craft of writing for a moment. I'm sure there's some folks in the room who are aspiring writers, and they say, "Oh, I just, you know, I'm too busy to write. I can't get off my butt to write. Oh, I don't have any ideas." Here you are. You're going through what you call the cobra of grief, and everything else in the world, and you have written during that entire time a book and innumerable essays at the same time.
They never stop.
She's like the soft serve of nonfiction. You just pull the thing down and just essays.
It's true.
Well, people are going to come away from this conversation confused, by the way.
Yeah. So what was the question?
What's your advice to other writers?
I mean, okay.
How to do what you do, even when they're not facing tough times.
I just feel like with writing, it's really simple. It's like either do it or you don't. Like, just you don't have to have 4 blocks of uninterrupted time. You need 5 minutes. I mean, I would write ideas in like 5 minutes. I would just think. You know, I'd be out in the world and I would start making these connections and I would just write down the connections. I think poets do this, so see, maybe I'm a poet. like an image, leaf, or whatever. And I would start making connections. So I would start making connections, and then the motor starts to run. And my motor was like in overdrive, because everything else was just so hard.
And you'd gone through a profound period of not writing.
Oh, I've been doing it for 40. I don't know what I was doing in LA. Running on the beach, doing yoga like 5 times a day. Who knows what I was doing? Running around trying to convert to Judaism. That was my big project.
That was a good one.
In Los Angeles, yeah. So I mean, and I was also, it just started as a teacher, so I was building up my teaching. I had plenty of time to do it. I just didn't, because I didn't feel compelled to do anything. I didn't feel like I had anything to say, frankly. And then, when this happened, I realized that I did have something to say about this particular subject, and I desperately wanted to say it. So it was kind of like a feast or famine. Like, all 4 years were like condensed into like 1 year.
So did you feel after you had finished your first book, okay, that's it, I have nothing else?
No, I wrote the worst novel ever written by anyone.
No.
Oh, yes.
I have books in print that are worse than that.
Oh, shit.
Check the reviews on me.
So yeah, I mean, I wrote a novel, I don't like it. I just wasn't, I don't know what it was. I was just kind of blocked, and there could have been all kinds of reasons for that. And I think it was also just fear of failing. And when I wrote this book, I didn't care. I was just like, I have nothing to lose. I have lost the most precious thing to me has been taken, and will be taken. And I'm going to have to watch it happen. So there's nothing more to lose. So all of my neuroses, well, not all of it, but most of it, all my fear, it just kind of disappeared. And it was like this really quiet, tranquil space. So what I say to students now is when you sit down to write with intention. You know, you don't have to own or do any yoga stuff before. And you can if you want to, but you know, just do it, say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to just have a goal, whatever it is for that day. And then it's, you know, it's kind of like that Nike thing. Like, either do it or you don't. And once you start doing it, then you want to do it more.
Do you feel like you'll continue to write nonfiction, or do you feel like you want to go back to writing fiction? I know you wrote a lot of fiction.
Soft serve, you know. Keep on giving. Essays are easy for me. They don't take me very long, and I like them, and I like that they involve someone with a real life as a prism through which other people can understand their lives in a different way. So in some ways, I think nonfiction is incredibly generous and not as narcissistic as people, unfortunately, sometimes think it is. But I'm working on fiction again. It's a break.
Right.
And because I had this novel I've been working on for like an embarrassing amount of years that I want to finish, and I do want to sort of.
The one that you pre-sold to the crowd as the worst piece of shit ever written?
Pretty much. No, that was another one. No, that was fire. That was like it failed. No, but this one is one that I started writing while I was writing this book. Mm-hmm. And when I had my little big episode of writing this book, I wrote like the first 50 pages of it, and I was like, oh, I really like how I cracked the code on that novel that I've been trying to write for literally 10 years. And it's so depressing. And it was because of this experience with Rona, I didn't overthink. I'm just done overthinking. I just don't do it anymore.
And you know, I think what the book shows. I mean, and the book is beautiful. I didn't say that enough. And it teaches hard lessons. And I know that your job as a writer is, and I know that you don't feel this way, is to teach lessons. That's not what you feel. But you can't read this book and not step away from it thinking, I don't need to be pissed off about being in line at Costco and having that person have too many things in front of me.
Yeah, I'm so good about stuff like
that. I do.
But I think, now I think about it. But you know that David Foster Wallace essay, This is Water, who talks about that. Like, you don't know what people are going through, and it's you know, you can't always practice it, you can't always have this empathy, but it definitely, like, I mean, I used to be afraid to fly, and now I'm like, I don't even care if the plane blows up. I just get on there and go to sleep.
I don't want to be on a flight with you when that happens, but they'll be cheering for you. No one's going to blow up the plane because there are veterans on it. They don't know.
No, but it's stuff like that. Or, I mean, I don't have the fears that I used to have, because I feel like, yeah, you know, I could die any moment. And I really felt that way with Ronan. Just watching him slip away and feeling like, okay, like, what am I gonna do? What kinds of choices am I gonna make in my life that result in the biggest, most beautiful life I can lead? Because he didn't have a single choice to make in his.
Right.
He was completely robbed of choices, but I'm not. So am I gonna survive the sorrow or throw myself on the funeral pyre? I mean, life is a privilege, and I'm gonna, you know, rock it for as long as I can. That's kind of what I was thinking. And I never felt like that before. I was kind of timid, not timid, but I was afraid of doing the wrong thing.
Timid is not a word I would have ever...
Timid inside, Todd.
Right, gotcha.
Just like you. But I was also really deeply concerned about what people thought of me, and now I just don't care.
So,
I really don't.
Now, but you're not, it's not like you're going to eat hot fudge sundaes every day.
No, of course not. No, it's not going to the extreme, but it's kind of, well, is that an offer?
Yeah, do you have something?
No. No, I just think it's about making, I think it's about making choices that make you happy. And I don't think eating hot fudge sundaes 6 times a day would probably ultimately make you happy.
No, probably not.
But I used to be a total over-exerciser, to the point, because I was trying to perfect something in the body, and now I'm just I do it because it's healthy, it makes me feel better, but I'm not doing it with the intention of meeting some arbitrary goal in the future. It's great to be goal-oriented, but it's also kind of annoying, because then you're always focused on the future, and you miss out on what you're doing in the moment. And I kind of am more present, I guess. And sometimes not. It's not like I'm some yogi or anything. I try to do yoga and I make to-do lists. So it's I'm not exactly practicing that, but I definitely feel more sort of emboldened by this idea that time is limited. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure the audience has some questions. We have someone with a microphone somewhere in the back there. The lovely Maggie Downs right there. So if you raise your hand, Maggie will come to you with the microphone and you can ask your question.
And a toaster.
And a toaster.
She's going to sell something.
Ladies and gentlemen, Maggie Downs with grand door number 2 with a toaster oven for you. There's the questions right there.
You made the comment that your parents felt strongly about keeping things, there are things you keep private, but then it would have been their decision to allow you to be a poster child for the March of Dimes?
Yeah, they let me do it because they felt like it would help me. So I asked them this question, I'm like, dude, private people, what's happening? Because they felt like it would help me take pride in my body. They thought it would be a happy thing. It's kind of a weird thing, but I think their thinking actually made sense.
And you were an adorable child.
Thank you very much.
The cover, you got to see the cover of the book. She's on a bicycle. She just looks adorable. Baby Emily Rapp, so cute.
I think we lived in a really small town in Wyoming. My parents grew up in a town of 800 people. I think they just wanted me to do something where I would feel proud of myself. I think it was just as basic as that. If they were here, they would answer, but they're not.
Mom, why'd you do that to me?
All right, there's another question there in the middle.
After you found out the diagnosis of your son, what kind of a support system were you surrounded by?
Well, I called all my girlfriends, which took 3 days, because we had to have the same conversation 50 times, and wailed and cried. And then I reached a friend of mine, Weber, who lives in Boston. She Googled Tay-Sachs, which is don't do that, it's really sad. And she found an organization in Boston. So she marched across some park in Boston, and went over there and signed me up, and people started calling me. Women who had kids with Tay-Sachs either in the past or currently, or had just been diagnosed. And so it was basically this group of women, and some dudes, but mostly women, who would call me. And then I went to, there's an annual family conference every year, and I went to that. I guess Rona had just been diagnosed 4 weeks before. And that was a really difficult thing, but it introduced me to those people. And that way I was able to call them in the middle of the night, which I did, and have a face to put with a name. So I had a lot of support, and I have an amazing, amazing friends, and a good family, and I felt that that was my net.
Okay, other questions?
$2,700 or...
If you raise your hand, Maggie will also give you a prize. There's a question over here. Emil, over there. We'll come to you in just one moment, sir. You don't need to run, Maggie. My goodness, it's hot outside, and you're wearing heels.
Yes, you mentioned that your parents had wanted you to be a poster child so that you would take pride in your body. I was wondering if that worked.
Not so much. It did when I was 6. I was like, someone's taking my photo. I kind of got into that. But I think ultimately it made me feel a little bit messed up about it, because it did kind of anoint me as the special person. And then I realized that it actually wasn't a crown that I wanted to wear so much. Does that make sense? So I think initially it did, and it got me used to talking about it, and it made me more conscious of it rather than just kind of ignoring it and going on with my life, which is sort of what kids with disabilities do. They just put on their legs or their hearing aids and get in their walkers and go. They're not thinking about it. And I think it was okay that I thought about it a little more deeply at that point.
But, I mean, later in life, you know, and this isn't anything that I'm not revealing secrets here, you were anorexic.
Yeah.
So, you know, your body image issues clearly.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I think, I'm not sure.
affected.
I mean, I link that to having an artificial leg. You know, I might have been that anyway. I mean, who knows? Like, you know, especially like when I was a kid in the 80s, everyone I knew was bulimic and anorexic. Like, there were so many of us, like, running around, barfing in toilets and eating carrot sticks. It was gross. It's hideous. And I think it's kind of a female thing. I think it's more of a female pathology that's sort of a social norm in some ways. But I do think it was linked to that. It was like this quest for some kind of perfection, like that ladder thing. Like, well, if I can't be normal, then I'll be the skinniest, or, you know, wanting to be the best at something. And there's this kind of grapple to do that.
Well, you talk about that a lot in the book too, about you want to be the prettiest, you want to be the funniest, you want to be all those things. And
Which
that,
I obviously am.
I mean, you're the top 5. All time. Yeah. There's Elvis, there's Emily. But you talk about that a lot in the book too, about how all that sort of stuff disappeared when Ronan got his diagnosis.
Oh, completely. I just don't care. Yeah. I mean, they didn't disappear totally, but it definitely, like, it, you know, lessened my attachment to those pathologies. And it is an addiction. It's an attachment, it's an addiction, it's a repetitive thought process. And any therapist, or mine, would tell you that that's something that you can change and shift as your life changes and shifts. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Ronan just completely blew all that apart for me. And that was a gift he gave me too. Like, God, who wants to spend their time, like, counting, like my mom still. You know, we'll go out to eat and she's got that Weight Watchers thing out, man, and she's counting her points. And I'm just like, you are 72. And you are the size of a hairpin. And I really don't care how many points that salad has. And no, we will not go to Applebee's where they have Weight Watcher meals. No. So, I mean, I think you have to, it floats away, these things, as your life changes.
Right.
I have a question.
Oh, hold on one moment, please. We're gonna there's a microphone. Oh, she has it. Gotcha. Go ahead.
Okay, I have a question in regard to heredity. Do you have brothers and sisters?
I do. I have a brother, an older brother.
Anyone else in your family affected with same sex?
Nope. No.
And there's a question down here in the front here. Want to bring the mic down?
Since you grew up in a religious family and you were ill as a baby and your little boy got ill, did your pastor father try to question God, or did he question his own beliefs? And you said you flirted with Judaism. Do you pray, or did you blame God or anything like that because of your upbringing?
No, I don't think I blamed God, unless you think of, I mean, I guess I kind of just was mad at the world. That would be the right thing. My dad, I think probably this was the hardest on him in terms of his belief system. My parents are very, like, they go to church every Sunday, they pray, they have these complicated prayer lists that I still don't understand. I've been putting people's names on them for most of my life. Like Jesus comfort, God's comfort, there's all this ranking of comfort for prayers. I still don't get it.
Have I been on your list?
You want to be on the list?
I'd like to be
Call
on
my
the
mom,
list.
because
Okay.
she's the list. She's got the list. I think it really destroyed my dad more than probably my mom, because he actually does have this very ardent, like, he really believes in Jesus in kind of the old-fashioned Midwestern way, where if you believe in Jesus, you try to, like, take people casseroles when they're sick, and you believe that when you die, you're going to go to heaven and see the people who have gone there and prayed and believed in Jesus too. And so they're not sort of the evangelicals Christians that we've come to associate with, you know, American expressions of Christianity. But I think it was very hard for him. But he never tried to, you know, one thing my parents have gotten really good at, because I've been training them for 38 years, is they just kind of witness what's happening, and they, you know, every once in a while they interject, and they regret it. But they just sort of, they're witnesses to what's happening as much as they can be. And they were a huge part of Ron's care, and taking care of him, and were there when he died, and you know, they believe that he's gone to heaven, and that comforts them. It doesn't comfort me because I don't believe it, but I'm perfectly happy of them, you know, to have them think of him that way if it helps their grief, which it does. Well, so I don't know if that answers your question.
And your father must have had those questions too, just when you were born.
Oh yeah, he's always had those questions. And my dad had a very sort of tragic, quote, life, and my mom too. So they've been questioning it, but they're very faithful people in that way that I don't think, I mean, I've never been that way. I mean, I'm going to be Jewish, you know, like, I mean, And I was into it because I wanted to be a part of a spiritual community. When I lost faith in Jesus, I realized I couldn't be Christian. And I thought, well, I can have all of that in Judaism, only without Jesus. I can have all the rituals, all the prayers, like better food, better songs, like
Neil Diamond.
So, but then at the end, I just realized that I just wasn't a believer in that expression of how our life is different from what lives may be beyond us here.
But if I may ask one more question before the audience does, how you were so indoctrinated into divinity, into God, you have a degree in God, there must be at least a part of your adult self that still battles with, what is sort of, what you studied for so long.
Yeah, I think most people that go to divinity school end up having an intellectual interest in religion, but not, a lot of people come out without faith. I mean, I didn't go to a seminary.
Right.
There's a difference, like the seminary, it's like people who are training vocationally as ministers, and I always went as an academic. So I think once you sort of study the Bible in an academic sense, it's really hard to believe the way you were taught to believe in it as a child, because it's just like any other piece of literature. It's been revised and redacted and changed, and it's not like it didn't fall from a cloud.
It's Oprah's next book also.
It's her next book pick.
Right after Wild.
Yeah. Wild and then
And then the Bible.
I'm intellectually interested in, and I guess this is probably reflected in the book, is how do people make meaning out of life that seems at times so brimming with meaning and so totally meaningless? And how can those things kind of exist at once? And what Hegel, our friend, he made charts, like trying to understand like stuff, like the world, basically. Nietzsche had all these ideas about how our system of morality doesn't mean anything because it's not based on anything, it's just made up out of thin air. So, I think I'm interested in that, not because I want to have a solution, but because I want to just go on the journey, I guess, the journey of the mind.
There's a question right here, right down the front. The lovely Heidi Simmons. Oh, someone's already got a microphone back there. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I know you've expressed this already, but can I just hear it again? How do you grapple, how have you grappled with the idea of, bad things happen to good people, which is something that I've struggled with and have a hard time.
And you talk a lot about this about luck in the book.
Yeah. Well, they use this book by Harold Kushner called "When Bad Things Happen to People," that my parents read. Because a lot of bad things happen to them, and they're like, good people. Yeah, we'll say they're good people. And I think, I think it's just, you have to just understand that there's not, this is where I think a lot of our cultural and religious myths make a mistake, is that they say, well, if you do this, then you will be blessed, right? This is a very sort of religious progression. So when people say things like, I'm so blessed, or I'm so lucky, I just want to be like, you just are living in the moment right now. Like it's not a final stamp on how good you've been, that you've been loaded with these gifts. Like everyone knows the world is unfair. And I think, not that it's okay that the world is unfair, I don't think we can stop trying to make it more just, but I do think we have to let go of these ideas that if you are good, there will be this like causal effect of good things happening to you. It just does not happen that way. And people say things like that all the time, like, oh, I can't believe she has cancer, she's such a good person. But they don't believe in God. But if you understood the world that way, that would mean that God looked down and was like, bad person, cancer. Which of course is completely ridiculous. So, it's just chaos. Chaos is life. And I think just sort of wrestling with that in your own life can be really liberating and scary at the same time. I don't think there's any easy answer. What's your answer?
I mean, it's also, though, I think in some regards, and this is also what you talk about sort of the persistence of trauma. You can choose to live in that constant cycle or not, right?
Yeah. I mean, I did think when I was diagnosed, I was like, I don't want to be, I want to die. And I was like, I have no interest in being in this world. Like,
Glad you didn't do that, by the way.
I was like, he's going to die and I'm next. And I really believed that because I was just like, I can't bear it. But then, the writing really helped me bear it, and then also meeting people who had gone through it, and then just also understanding that again, like, if I did that, it would totally dishonor him. And if I say that I loved him so much, then I have to experience the grief, which is a reflection of love, right? And I have to go on. There's like no other choice. And I think once you kind of put on like because I'm a vet, I'm used to being at war. But once you put on the helmet, you're in it. Like you're in it to win it, kind of thing. So I think it's hot. It's such a strange surreal moment. I've tried.
You should put that in your bio. Desert Storm veteran Emily Rapp. She was 7.
So yeah, I think just sort of this, and I think if you're a persistent person, it also helps. And I've always been that way. And who knows if having a disability made me that way, or if I would always have been kind of like a dog with a bone. Who knows?
Okay, who's next? Right there.
I'm curious, in this country, you talked about that, this country has a death phobia.
Yeah.
Do you think it's worse in this country, that our fear of death, I mean, that's obvious. I guess nobody wants to die.
No.
So,
well,
but it seems like in other countries they don't have it nearly like this nation, which tends to be more Protestant. So I'm real curious about why a country that has that Protestant belief in the resurrection would have such a phobia of death.
That's a good point. I don't know. I think actually it's more just that we're rich. And so people live longer and have more access to things that would kill them if they lived somewhere else, frankly. Like babies in Africa die all the time of diarrhea. Well, every day. Of things that are preventable, and we would think that's crazy. Who dies of diarrhea? Well, people do. So I think that's why we're so phobic of it, because our medical, this is my own opinion, the culture of the medical world is like save at all costs, without considering issues like quality of life and what does it mean to put someone on a machine. What does that mean? And I don't think there's any right or wrong answer, or even any right or wrong choice, but people don't consider those choices. So when Ronan was first diagnosed, doctors I would say, listen, I don't want him to have a feeding tube. I want him, when he can't eat, his body will shut down, he'll die. And they were like, well, we don't starve our children. And I was like, okay, dude, we're not talking about someone who's starving. We're talking about someone whose body can't take fluid, even fluid. And then you go into hospice care, who are really like, I think, the shining stars of the medical world. And they're like, okay, we know how to let people die. We know how to make them comfortable and have a peaceful exit. So I don't know what that's about, but it's interesting to make that connection with, if heaven were so great, then why aren't we all itching to get there? Which to me is what makes it such a strange, sort of spurious notion to begin with. Like, it's so illogical. But then my dad will say, yes, but that's why faith exists, because faith is not logical. And then the conversation stops. Which is right. I mean, he's right. Like, you have faith, you can do something. It doesn't have to be based on empirical evidence. So, then I feel like the evil scientist, and he's like the open-hearted like pastor, and it makes me mad. So we stopped talking then. But I think there's just, I think in a lot of cultures, there's more death, so you have to experience it more. And I think the only brush that we had with that in this country was 9/11. And there's a great book called Precarious Life that was written by a philosopher called Judith Butler. She's a great thinker, and she talks about that was our first sort of public grief in the last, whatever years, decade. I mean, at least in my lifetime, so 4 decades.
But even Pearl Harbor wasn't televised.
No, but like people like putting like pictures of their lost husband on these and wailing in the street. Like people were completely traumatized by that. But it was actually necessary and what should have happened. I mean, every year at the Tay-Sachs conference, there's a memorial for the kids who've died, and it is a room of people who are wailing. And I think that's great, because let it out. Like, wail and cry, and then go have dinner. Like, loss is part of life. People have got to learn it, because we're all going to die, and then it's like, well, when you come to the end of your life, are you going to be afraid? Well, yeah. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to be afraid of it until it actually happens, but you have to know it's coming. That helps me. I know it's not so dark. I find that really comforting. I do. We're all in the same boat. Be nice.
All right, we have time for one last question here. Does someone else have? Oh, there's one right there in the middle. Maggie, you're going to get the microphone. Don't speak. Here it comes. Here it comes. Here it comes. Don't speak. You may now speak.
Hi, Emily. My question was, when your son Ronan finally did pass away, what did you do for services, because you come from a religious background, and you also have religious studies as your own background? How did you pull something together, or was your book his memorial service?
I had a big party.
You did?
Yeah, where we ate his favorite food, and people wrote songs or sang songs and talked and drank wine and ate marshmallow pudding and looked at pictures of him, and that was it. Nothing, no service. I mean, I think my Catholic relatives are having some big mass for him in Illinois, and that's great. I think, you know, some people did some of my friends had little, like, memorials in different parts of the country for him that had known me and been with him. So, but nothing in a church. Yeah. Or a temple, or wherever. The graveside, nothing.
Well, Emily, thank you so much
Thanks,
for coming here.
Todd.
Thank you for writing this wonderful book, The Still Point of the Training World.
Oh, you have the early one.
It is for sale outside. Emily is happy to sign copies for you and chat with you out in the signing room. A round of applause for Emily Rapp.
Thank you guys for being here.